Commander Zarakith stood by the large window on the observation deck. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. She was tall, even for her species. 7 feet of muscle and crimson scales that seemed darker and more vibrant than any other Varathi she had ever met. Her claws were longer, sharper. Her eyes held a fire that made others uncomfortable. She had always been different. Even as a child in the spawning pools, the other younglings kept their distance. They played their games of stealth and hiding, while she preferred direct confrontation. The elders called her aggressive. Her clutch mother said she lacked grace. By the time she reached adolescence, Zarakith understood the truth. She scared her own people. The Varathi valued subtlety. They moved through shadows, spoke in whispers, and avoided drawing attention to themselves. Their entire culture was built on the concept of remaining small and unnoticed. It kept them safe in a galaxy full of larger, more aggressive species. But Zarakith could not make herself small. Every room she entered fell silent. Every conversation stopped when she approached. She joined the military because it was the only place where her nature seemed appropriate. Warriors were supposed to be strong and fierce, but even there she found herself isolated. Her commanding officers gave her assignments but never invited her to strategy sessions. Her fellow soldiers followed her orders but never asked her to join them for meals. She won battles and earned commendations, yet no one celebrated with her. The turning point came during the Kelith border dispute. Zarakith had developed a new tactical approach that ended the conflict in days rather than months. High Command praised her brilliance in official reports. They promoted her to commander. Then they sent her here, to the Galactic Council Station, as far from Varathi space as possible. They called it an honor, a liaison position with the Joint Species Defense Initiative, but Zarakith knew what it really was. Exile. A way to use her skills while keeping her away from those she made. Uncomfortable. The station was home to dozens of species. The insectoid Clith scuttled through the corridors in their chittering groups. The aquatic Nesseri floated in their water-filled transit tubes. The furry Pelthans traveled in family units, their children playing in the communal areas. Each species had their own customs, their own ways of interacting, but they all shared one reaction to Zarakith. Fear. She had learned to read it in 1,000 small ways. The Clith would freeze their antenna when she passed. The Nessari darkened their bioluminescent patches. The Pelthan children hid behind their parents. Even the station's commander, a dignified Solarian named Velsath, kept their conversations brief and formal. Zarakith told herself it did not matter. She had her duty. She had her work. She reviewed tactical reports, attended security briefings, and maintained the defense protocols. She did not need friends or social connections. That was what she told herself every night in her quarters. Alone. The alert came through on her communication device. The human delegation would arrive within the hour. Zarakith had read everything available about humans. They were new to the galactic community, having only achieved faster-than-light travel a few decades ago. Their home planet, Earth, was located in a distant arm of the galaxy that most species considered too remote to bother with. The reports painted an interesting picture. Humans were small compared to most spacefaring species. They had no natural armor, no claws or fangs, no venom or defensive spines. They were soft and fragile, yet they had somehow survived on a death world filled with predators and natural disasters. Their planet had weather systems that could level cities and tectonic activity that reshaped continents. More concerning to the Galactic Council was human psychology. They formed emotional bonds with almost anything. They kept dangerous predators as pets. They cried at sad stories and laughed at their own misfortunes. They were unpredictable, emotional, and prone to actions that other species found bizarre. The Council expected problems. Several species had already filed complaints about human behavior. The humans were too loud, too casual with authority figures, too quick to touch others without permission. They asked too many questions and ignored social hierarchies. Some council members wanted to limit human expansion until they learned proper galactic etiquette. Zarakith straightened her uniform and headed toward the docking bay. As the station's liaison officer, it was her duty to greet the newcomers and guide them through their orientation. She expected the same reactions she always received. The humans would see her, recognize a predator, and instinctively step back. They would be polite but distant. They would avoid her gaze and keep conversations short. The docking bay was already crowded with curious onlookers. Various species had gathered to see the humans, these strange newcomers everyone was talking about. Zarakith moved through the crowd, and as always, they parted before her. A path opened wherever she walked. She took her position near the airlock and waited. The transport ship had already connected to the station. atmosphere was equalizing. In moments, the doors would open, and she would meet the humans. Just another diplomatic duty. Just another group of aliens who would fear her on sight. The airlock hissed. Pressure equalized with a soft whoosh of air. The doors slid open with a mechanical hum. Captain Linda Morrison stepped through first. She was small, as the reports indicated, barely reaching Zaraketh's chest. Her hair was gray, and her eyes were a pale blue that seemed to take in everything at once. She looked at Zaraketh, nodded once with what appeared to be respect, then turned to gesture for her crew to follow. They filed in one by one. Lieutenant Amy Peterson, young and eager with dark skin and darker eyes. Sergeant Kevin Barnes, stocky and solid, with a scarred face that suggested combat experience. Engineer Claire Foster, thin and nervous, carrying a data pad covered in handwritten notes. Dr. Paul Henderson, older like the captain, with gentle hands and a calm expression. Then he walked through the airlock. Lieutenant Jake Collins, brown hair that looked slightly messy despite obvious attempts to control it. Average height for a human, a simple uniform with few decorations. Nothing about him stood out or seemed remarkable, except his eyes. When Jake Collins looked at Zaraketh, he did not look away. His gaze met hers directly, without flinching, without the subtle shift that indicated discomfort. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the docking bay. Zaraketh waited for the inevitable reaction. The step backward, the averting of eyes, the tightening of shoulders that indicated tension that it never came. Instead, Jake Collins did something no one had ever done before. He smiled. Not a nervous smile or a diplomatic pleasantry meant to hide fear. A genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. Then he walked straight toward her while everyone else was still organizing themselves by the airlock. He moved with confidence and ease, as if approaching a 7-foot predator was the most natural thing in the world. When he reached her, he extended his hand in what Zaraketh recognized as a human greeting gesture. His voice was warm and friendly when he spoke. The translator in Zaraketh's ear converted his words to Varathi, but even without understanding, she could hear the genuine emotion in his tone. He looked down at her identification badge, reading her name. Then he looked back up at her face, meeting her eyes again with that same unflinching directness. And he told her it was an honor to meet her. Zaraketh found herself frozen in place. Her mind struggled to process what was happening. This human, this small, soft creature, was standing directly in front of her with his hand extended. He was smiling. He had walked toward her, not away from her. She realized she had been staring too long. Her clawed hand reached out and took his offered hand. Her fingers wrapped around his entire hand easily. She could feel the warmth of his skin through her scales. He did not pull away or tense up. His grip was firm and confident. Jake Collins spoke again. He told her to call him Jake. Then he said something that made Zaraketh's mind go completely blank. He said she was even more impressive in person than in the intelligence briefings. He used the word impressive. Not frightening, not intimidating, impressive. She managed to respond, though her voice came out rougher than intended. She welcomed him to the station. It was a standard greeting, something she had said dozens of times to other species. But this felt different. Everything about this felt different. Jake released her hand and turned to gesture at his fellow humans. He introduced them one by one. Each of them nodded or waved at Zaraketh. None of them looked afraid. Lieutenant Amy Peterson grinned and said something about being excited to work with Varathi military experts. Sergeant Kevin Barnes gave a respectful nod that reminded Zaraketh of how warriors acknowledged each other. Even the nervous engineer, Claire Foster, managed a small smile. Captain Morrison stepped forward and formally introduced herself. She spoke about looking forward to cooperation between their species. She asked if Zaraketh would be their primary liaison during their stay. When Zaraketh confirmed this, the captain smiled and said they were in good hands. The orientation tour should have been routine. Zaraketh had given it dozens of times to other species. She showed them the residential quarters, the dining facilities, the recreational areas, the command center. She explained station protocols and emergency procedures. She answered questions about galactic law and customs. But nothing about this tour felt routine. Jake walked beside her the entire time, asking questions that showed he had actually studied Varathi culture. He asked about military traditions. He wanted to know about tactical philosophy. He questioned her about the differences between Varathi combat doctrine and other species' approaches. Other species usually asked basic questions about food or sleeping arrangements. Jake asked about honor codes and command structures. He listened to her answers with genuine interest. He made comments that showed he understood the deeper concepts she was explaining. The other humans followed their lead. Amy asked about training methods. Kevin wanted to know about weapons systems. Even Claire, who admitted she knew nothing about military matters, asked thoughtful questions about how different species communicated during joint operations. By the time they reached the dining facility, Zaraketh realized something strange was happening. She was enjoying herself. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was having an actual conversation, not a brief exchange of necessary information, but a real discussion with people who seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. The dining facility was crowded during mid-cycle. Various species gathered in their own groups, eating foods appropriate to their biology. Zaraketh usually took her meals alone in her quarters to avoid making others uncomfortable, but Captain Morrison invited her to join the human delegation at their table. Zaraketh hesitated. The other species in the dining facility were already staring. Her presence at the human table would attract even more attention, but Jake simply pulled out a chair that had been designed for larger species and gestured for her to sit. She sat. The humans arranged themselves around the table and began discussing their food options. The station's food processors could create meals appropriate for most known species. The humans seemed excited to try foods from different worlds. Jake asked Zaraketh what she would recommend. She suggested several Varathi dishes, explaining the nutritional content and flavor profiles. Then Jake did something that surprised her again. He ordered the same meal she had chosen. When the food arrived, he tried it without hesitation and declared it excellent. The meal became a social event. The humans talked and laughed. They told stories about their journey to the station. They asked Zaraketh about her experiences in the military. They treated her like a regular member of their group, not like a dangerous predator to be cautiously avoided. Other species in the dining facility watched with obvious confusion. The cliff clustered in corners, their antennae twitching nervously. The Pelthans whispered to each other, glancing between the humans and Zaraketh. Even Velsath, the station commander, stood in the doorway for several minutes, observing the strange scene with their multiple eyes. Zaraketh found herself telling stories she had never shared before. She described her first combat mission. She explained how Varathi tactics had evolved over centuries. She even mentioned some of the challenges she had faced as someone who did not fit standard Varathi social norms. Jake listened to everything. When she finished talking about being different from her own people, he nodded slowly. Then he said something that hit Zaraketh like a physical blow. He said humans actually found her intensity refreshing rather than frightening. Where other species saw aggression, humans saw confidence. Where others saw a predator, humans saw a warrior. Amy agreed immediately. She said humans respected people who were direct and honest. Kevin added that in human military culture, commanders, like Zaraketh, were exactly the type of leaders soldiers wanted to follow. Zaraketh felt something strange happening in her chest. It was warm and uncomfortable and completely unfamiliar. She realized with shock that her scales were flushing a darker shade of crimson. It was a biological response she had not experienced since adolescence, triggered by strong positive emotions. The conversation continued for over an hour. Other species came and went from the dining facility, but the humans remained at their table with Zaraketh. They seemed in no hurry to leave. They acted as if sitting with a Varathi warrior was perfectly normal and enjoyable. Eventually, Captain Morrison announced they needed to report to their assigned quarters and begin settling in. The humans stood, gathering their trays. Jake was the last to stand. He looked at Zaraketh and asked if she would be available tomorrow to help them understand the station's tactical systems. Zaraketh confirmed she would. It was her duty as liaison officer, but Jake shook his head and clarified. He was not asking because of duty. He was asking because he enjoyed talking with her and wanted to continue their conversation. She agreed. They set a time to meet. Then Jake did something else unexpected. He reached out and gently touched her arm just below her shoulder. It was a brief contact, lasting only a second. But it was deliberate and friendly. A gesture of connection. The humans left the dining facility together. Zaraketh remained at the table for several minutes, trying to understand what had just happened. An entire species had just treated her normally, more than normally. They had treated her like someone valuable and interesting. She looked down at her arm where Jake had touched her. The scales there were still slightly darker from her earlier flush of emotion. She pressed her own clawed hand against the spot, feeling the warmth that lingered around the dining facility. Other species were whispering. She could hear fragments of their conversations. They were confused by what they had witnessed. The humans had voluntarily spent time with her. They had not shown any fear. Some species seemed concerned. Others seemed curious. Zarakith stood and left the dining facility. She walked through the corridors back to her quarters. As always, others moved out of her path, but for the first time, it did not feel like isolation. It felt like she was moving through the station with purpose, with something to look forward to. In her quarters, she sat on her sleeping platform and reviewed what had happened. She analyzed every interaction, every word spoken. She tried to find logical explanations for human behavior. Perhaps they were simply ignorant of proper fear responses. Perhaps they did not understand that she was dangerous. But that explanation did not fit. Jake had specifically mentioned reading intelligence briefings about her. He knew about her military record. He understood what she was capable of. And still he had smiled. Still he had approached her without fear. Zarakith accessed her computer terminal and began researching human culture more deeply. She read about their history. She learned about their evolution as pursuit predators on their homeworld. She discovered that humans had a strange tendency to befriend dangerous creatures. They kept wolves as companions and called them dogs. They rescued predatory cats and birds of prey, nursing them back to health. That the reports described humans as intensely social creatures who formed bonds across species barriers. They seemed to see potential friends everywhere, even in beings that should logically be threats. The next morning, Zarakith arrived at the tactical center early. She wanted to prepare the systems and review the training materials before the humans arrived. The tactical center was one of her favorite places on the station. It was filled with holographic displays, strategic maps, and simulation equipment. Here, she could focus on what she did best. Jake arrived exactly on time. He was alone, which surprised Zarakith. She had expected the entire delegation. He explained that the others were attending various orientation sessions, but he had specifically requested time to work with her on tactical systems. They spent the morning reviewing defensive protocols. Jake absorbed information quickly. He asked smart questions that showed he understood complex strategic concepts. When Zarakith demonstrated a particular defensive formation, Jake immediately saw both its strengths and potential weaknesses. But more than his intelligence, what struck Zarakith was his comfort around her. He stood close when examining displays. He leaned over her shoulder to see details on screens. He made casual physical contact, touching her arm to get her attention or gesturing near her when making points. Every touch was brief and respectful, but they happened naturally, without the tension other species showed. During a break, they sat in the observation area overlooking the main display. Jake asked about her background, not her military record, which he had already read. He wanted to know about her personally. What made her join the military? What did she enjoy doing when not on duty? What were her goals? Zarakith found herself answering honestly. She told him about growing up different from other Varath. She described the isolation she had felt her entire life. She admitted that she had never really had friends, only colleagues who tolerated her presence. Jake listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that changed everything. He told her that her problem was not her. Her problem was that she had been living among species that valued being small and unnoticeable. Humans did not think that way. Humans respected people who took up space and owned it. Humans admired strength and confidence. Zarakith stared at him. The concept was so foreign to everything she had known. Every society she had encountered prized subtlety and restraint. The idea that an entire species might value the opposite seemed impossible. But Jake continued. He explained human history. He told her about human warriors and leaders who were remembered specifically because they were intimidating and powerful. He described how human military culture celebrated fierce commanders and bold warriors. He said that humans wrote songs and stories about people exactly like her. Then he met her eyes again with that direct, unflinching gaze. He said there was a difference between intimidating and dangerous. She was intimidating because she was competent, skilled, and confident. That was not something to fear. That was something to respect. The word he used next made Zarakith's scales flush dark crimson again. He said her qualities were attractive. Not attractive in a simple aesthetic sense, but attractive as in drawing people toward her rather than pushing them away. At least, that was how humans would see her. Zarakith did not know what to say. She had never considered that her nature could be viewed positively. She had spent her entire life trying to minimize herself, to make others more comfortable. And here was Jake, telling her she should do the opposite. They returned to work, but something had shifted. Zarakith found herself standing taller. She stopped unconsciously trying to make herself seem smaller. When she explained tactical concepts, she used her full commanding voice instead of the softer tone. she usually adopted around other species. Jake responded positively to every change. He seemed more engaged, more energized. He told her this was the real her, the commander who had won battles and earned commendations. This was the person he had read about in intelligence reports. Over the following days, other humans began seeking out Zaraketh. Amy requested help understanding Varathi combat philosophy. She wanted to know how Varathi warriors trained and what made their tactics effective. Zaraketh found herself conducting an impromptu training session in one of the station's gyms. Amy was small even by human standards, but she moved with surprising speed and precision. She learned the basic Varathi defensive positions quickly. When Zaraketh demonstrated an advanced move, Amy asked to see it again in slow motion. She studied every detail, then attempted to replicate it. Kevin joined them the next day. He was more interested in weapons and equipment. Zaraketh showed him how Varathi combat blades were designed and forged. She explained the philosophy behind their balance and weight distribution. Kevin listened with the attention of someone who truly appreciated craftsmanship. Soon, other humans were regularly joining these sessions. They seemed genuinely interested in learning from her. They asked questions, practiced techniques, and discussed strategy. The gym became a regular meeting place. Other species on the station noticed. The Clith began observing from the doorways. The Pelthans watched through windows. Even some of the more reserved species started paying attention. They saw humans willingly training with a Varathi warrior. They saw humans laughing and joking with Zaraketh during breaks. Captain Morrison personally requested that Zaraketh lead a joint training exercise. It would involve human personnel and members of several other species. Morrison explained that many species were afraid to train realistically. They pulled their strikes and held back, worried about causing offense or showing too much aggression. Morrison wanted Zaraketh to show them how real warriors trained. She wanted the other species to see that intensity and aggression in training did not mean hostility or danger. It meant taking preparation seriously. Zaraketh agreed. The exercise was scheduled for the following week. She spent days preparing scenarios and designing challenges. She wanted to create something that would push everyone without being unfair to species with different physical capabilities. Jake helped her plan. They worked late into station night cycles, reviewing scenarios and adjusting difficulty levels. During these sessions, they talked about more than just tactics. Jake told her about Earth, about the diverse cultures and environments on his homeworld. Zaraketh described the Varathi homeworld, the deep crimson jungles and towering stone cities. They discovered they had similar views on leadership. Both believed commanders should lead from the front. Both valued honesty over diplomacy. Both thought that respect had to be earned through action, not given automatically based on rank. One evening, after a particularly long planning session, Jake asked Zaraketh a personal question. He wanted to know if she had ever been happy, not satisfied with accomplishments or pleased with success, but genuinely happy. Zaraketh thought about it carefully. She realized the answer was no. She had felt pride in her achievements. She had felt satisfaction when completing difficult missions. But happiness, the warm positive emotion that came from connection and belonging, was something she had never experienced until now. She admitted to Jake that the past few weeks had been different. Working with humans, training with them, talking with them, it created feelings she did not have words for in her own language. The closest Varathi term translated roughly as contentment, but that seemed inadequate. Jake smiled that warm, genuine smile. He said the word she was looking for was probably happiness or joy. He said he was glad she was experiencing it. Then he added something that made her scales flush again. He said that knowing her, working with her, learning from her, it made him happy too. The humans had come to the station expecting to be the outsiders, the strange newcomers everyone was wary of. Instead, they had found someone who understood what it felt like to be different, someone who was strong enough to be herself. Despite pressure to change, Zaraketh felt that unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest again. She realized she was experiencing something she had read about, but never understood. Friendship, real connection with another being, not based on duty or necessity, but on genuine mutual respect and enjoyment of each other's company. The training exercise arrived. Zaraketh stood in the main training hall with representatives from 6 different species. The humans were there in force. Several Clith had volunteered, their antennae twitching nervously. A group of Pelthans huddled together, clearly uncomfortable. Even 2 Nasari had agreed to participate. Floating importable water tanks, modified with mechanical arms. Zaraketh began the exercise with a speech. She explained that training was not about being polite. It was about pushing limits and discovering capabilities. She told them she would be demanding, intense, and aggressive in her instruction. This was not because she wanted to intimidate them. It was because she respected them enough to believe they could handle real challenges. Jake stood to the side, watching with arms crossed and an encouraging expression. When Zarakith finished speaking and asked if everyone was ready, he was the first to shout agreement. The training exercise went better than Zarakith had hoped. The humans threw themselves into every challenge with enthusiasm. The other species, seeing human confidence, began to push themselves harder. By the end of the session, even the nervous Pelthans were attempting advanced maneuvers. Something changed on the station after that day. Other species began approaching Zarakith in corridors. They did not exactly seek her out for conversation, but they stopped avoiding her completely. Some nodded in greeting. A few asked brief questions about training schedules. It was not friendship, but it was progress. The humans, meanwhile, had become a constant presence in her life. Jake stopped by her quarters most evenings. Sometimes they reviewed tactical scenarios. Sometimes they simply talked. Amy joined them for meals in the dining facility. Kevin started inviting Zarakith to human movie nights, where they watched films from Earth and explained cultural references she did not understand. For the first time in her life, Zarakith had something resembling a social circle. She had people who sought her company not because duty required it, but because they genuinely enjoyed being around her. The isolation that had defined her entire existence was breaking apart. Then the distress call came through. Zarakith was in the command center when the communication arrived. A civilian transport ship was under attack in the neutral zone. The ship carried over 200 passengers from multiple species, including families with children. Raiders were demanding cargo and threatening to space the passengers. If their demands were not met, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Representatives from a dozen species gathered in the main conference chamber. Zarakith attended as the station's military liaison. Jake accompanied Captain Morrison as part of the human delegation. The debate began immediately. The Solarian representative argued they needed to verify the distress call was legitimate before taking action. The Clith representative worried about jurisdiction since the attack was happening in neutral space. The Pelthan representative wanted to negotiate with the raiders first. To avoid violence, Zarakith listened to the discussion with growing frustration. Every minute they spent debating was another minute those civilians were in danger. The raiders were not going to negotiate. They were criminals who preyed on helpless ships. Talking would only give them more time to escape with their hostages. Another message came through from the transport ship. The captain's voice was desperate. The raiders were getting impatient. They had begun moving passengers toward the airlocks. The council representatives continued arguing about proper procedures and protocols. Zarakith felt her claws digging into the table. She forced herself to remain calm, to follow proper diplomatic procedures. But everything in her training and instinct screamed that action was needed. Not more discussion, that she could not hold back any longer. Her fist hit the table with enough force to make the other representatives jump. Her voice came out as a growl, rough and aggressive. She told them they were wasting time. Every minute of debate was a minute those civilians did not have. The other species representatives immediately tensed. Several shifted away from her. The Solarians' multiple eyes narrowed. The Clith began clicking their mandibles in distress. Zarakith felt the familiar isolation creeping back. She had let her intensity show, and now they would dismiss her input because she had made them uncomfortable. Then Jake stood up. His voice cut through the sudden silence in the chamber. He said Commander Zarakith was right. They were wasting time debating while people died. He turned to Captain Morrison and formally requested permission to launch a rescue operation. Morrison did not hesitate. She stood and declared permission granted. Then she did something that shocked the entire council. She asked Zarakith if she would lead the tactical operation. The chamber erupted in protests. The other representatives argued this was improper procedure. They claimed Varathi military doctrine was too aggressive for a rescue operation. They suggested waiting for proper authorization from their respective governments. Captain Morrison cut through the noise with a single statement. She said the Galactic Council could debate procedures. Meanwhile, the humans were going to save those civilians. Anyone who wanted to help was welcome. Anyone who preferred to keep talking could stay here. Within minutes, Morrison had organized a response team. Jake volunteered immediately. Amy and Kevin both stepped forward. Half a dozen other human personnel requested to join. To everyone's surprise, the Clith warriors also volunteered. They said they had trained with Zarakith and trusted her leadership. Zarakith moved into command mode instantly. The doubt and uncertainty from the council chamber vanished. This was what she had trained for her entire life. She outlined a tactical plan quickly and efficiently. The transport ship was being held at a specific location. The raiders had a standard defensive setup. She could see 3 viable approach vectors. Jake and his team would come in from the port side, creating a distraction. Amy's group would secure the engineering section. Kevin and the Clith warriors would clear the cargo bay where most hostages were held. Zarakith herself would lead a direct assault on the bridge, where the raider leaders were coordinating their operation. They prepped for launch within the hour. The station's small fleet of tactical shuttles was more than adequate for the mission. Zarakith coordinated from the lead shuttle, communicating with all teams through secure channels that the approach was textbook perfect. They came in fast and hard, using the radiation from a nearby star to mask their signatures until the last possible moment. The raiders never saw them coming. Jake's team hit first, exactly as planned. The explosion on the port side pulled raiders away from the hostages. Amy's group secured engineering and cut power to the raiders' weapons systems. Kevin and the Clith warriors stormed the cargo bay with precision that would have impressed any military instructors. Zarakith breached the bridge with 3 human marines backing her up. The raider captain tried to threaten the hostages, but Zarakith moved faster than he could react. Her claws caught his weapon and flung it across the room. The other raiders surrendered immediately when faced with a 7-foot Varathi warrior in full combat mode. The entire operation took less than 20 minutes. Not a single hostage was injured. The raiders were secured and ready for transport to proper authorities. The civilian ship's crew were shaken but grateful and alive. On the return flight to the station, Zarakith sat in the pilot seat of her shuttle. Jake sat in the co-pilot position, monitoring communications. He looked over at her and said exactly what she needed to hear. He told her he knew she could do it. He said she was born for this. Those simple words meant more than any official commendation. Someone believed in her. Someone had faith in her abilities, not despite her intensity, but because of it. They docked at the station to find a crowd waiting. Word of the successful rescue had spread quickly. The civilians they had saved were already being processed through medical checks and given quarters to rest. Families were reunited. Children who had been terrified hours earlier were now safe with their parents. The Galactic Council representatives were there too. They looked uncomfortable but could not deny the results. The Solarian representative formally thanked Zarakith for her decisive action. The Pelthan representative admitted that perhaps aggressive tactics had their place in certain situations. More importantly, the rescued civilians wanted to meet their rescuers. A Clith family approached Zarakith, their young offspring hiding behind the adults. The parents spoke through a translator, expressing gratitude. Then the youngster peeked out and waved a small appendage at her. Zarakith carefully lowered herself to be closer to the child's level. She had never been good with youngsters of any species, but the child did not seem afraid. After a moment, the youngster stepped forward and gently touched one of Zarakith's claws. The parent explained their offspring wanted to thank the big warrior who saved them. Zarakith felt that warm sensation in her chest again, stronger than ever before. She carefully extended one claw for the youngster to hold. The child gripped it with surprising strength and declared they wanted to be brave like her. When they grew up, more civilians came forward. Humans, Pelthans, Nessari, even a few. They thanked the rescue team. They praised Zarakith's leadership. For the first time, members of multiple species were looking at her with gratitude and admiration instead of fear. A message came through on Zarakith's personal communicator. It was from Varathi High Command. Her people had received reports of the rescue operation. They were sending official commendation. More than that, they wanted her input on updating Varathi tactical doctrine based on her innovative approaches. Her own people were finally acknowledging her, not as a problem to be sent away, but as a valuable warrior with skills worth recognizing. It should have been the greatest moment of her career, but when Zarakith looked around at the scene in the docking bay, she realized something. The praise from her own people felt distant and formal. What mattered more was Jake standing beside her, grinning with pride. What mattered was Amy laughing as she recounted the mission details to other humans. What mattered was Kevin clasping her shoulder in the way human warriors showed respect to each other. The weeks following the rescue operation changed everything on the station. Other species began requesting joint training sessions with Zarakith. The Clith warriors who had participated in the rescue told their fellows about her tactical brilliance. The Pelthans, traditionally the most peaceful species, asked her to teach them defensive techniques. The Varathi High Command sent more than just a commendation. They sent requests for her to develop new training protocols. They wanted her to lead seminars for other Varathi officers. They asked her to consider returning home to take a position at the military academy, but Zaraketh found herself hesitant. Returning to Varathi space meant leaving the station. It meant leaving the humans. It meant leaving Jake. She had not fully acknowledged what was developing between them. The humans had taught her about friendship and belonging, but what she felt when Jake entered a room went beyond friendship. Her scales flushed darker whenever he smiled at her. Her heart rate increased when he stood close. She caught herself looking for him in crowds. The humans had a specific word for it. Love. Zaraketh had read about it in cultural databases. Humans formed deep emotional bonds with specific individuals. They chose partners based on connection and compatibility rather than breeding protocols or family arrangements. The concept seemed strange to Varathi thinking. Her people paired based on genetic compatibility and social standing. Emotional attachment was not part of the equation. But then again, Zaraketh had never fit Varathi norms anyway. Jake seemed to understand before she did. One evening he arrived at her quarters with what humans called dinner. He had prepared food himself rather than using the station's processors. He explained it was a human custom to share personally prepared meals with people you cared about. They ate together in her quarters, something that had become routine over the past months. But tonight felt different. Jake kept glancing at her, then looking away. He seemed uncertain, which was unusual for him. Finally, he spoke. He told her that his assignment on the station was supposed to be temporary. 6 months, maybe a year at most. But he had put in a request for permanent posting. He wanted to stay here, on this station, working as liaison to Varathi military operations. Zaraketh felt her chest tightened. She asked why he would give up opportunities for advancement. Liaison postings were entry positions, not career tracks. He could return to Earth and take a command position. Jake met her eyes with that direct gaze she had come to cherish. He said he was staying because everything he wanted was here. His work was meaningful. He was learning things no other human had the chance to learn. And most importantly, the person he cared about most was here. The words hung in the air between them. Zaraketh understood what he was saying without him speaking more directly. Humans were good at subtle emotional communication, despite their reputation for being direct. She told him about the offer from Varathi High Command. She explained they wanted her to return home to take a prestigious position. It would mean recognition from her people, acceptance she had never received before. Jake nodded slowly. He said she should take it if that was what she wanted. He would never ask her to give up opportunities for him, but his expression showed disappointment he tried to hide. Zaraketh realized she had already made her decision. She had spent her entire life seeking acceptance from her own people. Now they were offering it, and she was going to refuse. Because what the humans had given her was more valuable than acceptance. They had given her understanding. She told Jake she was going to decline the position. She explained that returning to Varathi space meant going back to a society that would only accept her now because she had proven herself valuable. The humans had accepted her from the beginning when she had proven nothing to them. Jake's smile was brighter than she had ever seen it. He asked if she was sure. She confirmed she was certain. This station, this position, this life she had built with humans around her, it was where she belonged. Then Jake did something that surprised her even. Though she was learning to expect surprising things from humans, he reached out and took her clawed hand in both of his smaller hands. He asked if she understood what he was trying to tell her earlier. Zaraketh's scales flushed so dark they were almost black. She said she thought she understood, but human emotional communication was still somewhat confusing to her. Jake laughed softly. He said humans sometimes had trouble with it too. Then he spoke clearly and directly. He told her that he had feelings for her that went beyond friendship. He found her fascinating, impressive, and yes, attractive. He wanted to explore what could develop between them. If she was interested. In Varathi culture, such a declaration would require formal negotiations between families. There would be genetic testing and social status reviews. The idea of simply choosing a partner based on emotional connection was foreign, but Zaraketh was done letting Varathi culture dictate her life. She told Jake that she had similar feelings. She admitted she did not fully understand them yet, but she wanted to learn. She wanted to explore this with him. Jake squeezed her hand gently. He explained they could move at whatever pace felt comfortable. Humans understood that different species had different approaches to relationships. They would figure it out together. That the relationship developed slowly over the following months. They continued working together professionally, but they also spent more personal time together. Jake taught her about human customs around romantic relationships. She explained Varathi, biology and communication to him. The other humans on the station were supportive. Amy told Zarakith that she thought they made a good pair. Kevin said Jake seemed happier than he had ever seen him. Captain Morrison privately told Zarakith that she approved, and that cross-species relationships were becoming more common as humans integrated into galactic society. Other species on the station had mixed reactions. Some were confused by the concept, others seemed intrigued. A few expressed concern, though most kept those concerns private. The Clith found it fascinating and asked many questions about how such relationships functioned. Varathi High Command learned about the relationship when Zarakith formally declined their offer. She explained in her response that she had found a place where her nature was valued rather than tolerated. She said she had developed personal connections that were important to her. She offered to provide consultation and training materials remotely, but she would not be returning to Varathi space. The response from High Command was cold and formal. They acknowledged her decision and accepted her offer of remote consultation, but the subtext was clear. By choosing humans over her own people, she was confirming what they had always believed. She did not truly belong with the Varathi. Zarakith found she did not care. The opinion of people who had never accepted her no longer held power. What mattered was the opinion of those who knew her and valued her. Jake was promoted to captain and given command of the human liaison operations. Zarakith became the permanent Varathi military advisor to the station. With additional duties training mixed-species tactical teams, they worked together officially and spent their personal time together as well. One evening, nearly a year after they had first met, Jake asked Zarakith to join him on the observation deck. It was the same place where she had stood alone on the day the humans arrived, where she had expected to spend her exile in isolation. They stood at the viewport, looking out at the stars. Earth was visible in the distance, a small blue sphere. The Varathi homeworld was in a different direction, a crimson dot among millions of stars. Jake pointed at Earth. He told her that humans had a saying, "Home is where the heart is." It meant that home was not necessarily the place you were born or where your people came from. Home was where you felt you belonged. Zarakith understood what he meant. She had been born on the Varathi homeworld. She had served in their military for years, but she had never felt at home there. Here on this station, surrounded by humans and other species, working beside Jake, this felt like home. She told him about a Varathi saying, "Strength recognizes strength." It was used to describe how true warriors could identify each other regardless of rank or appearance. But Zarakith had come to understand it differently now. The humans had strength, but not the physical strength the Varathi prized. They had strength of character, the strength to look at someone different and see a person worth knowing, the strength to offer friendship without demanding change first, the strength to stand beside someone everyone else feared. Jake smiled and moved closer to her. She had learned human body language well enough to understand the gesture. She leaned down slightly to accommodate their height difference. He reached up and placed his hand against her scales, just over where her heart beat. He said she had shown him strength too. The strength to be herself despite a lifetime of pressure to change. The strength to lead even when others doubted. The strength to open herself to new possibilities and relationships. The station continued its quiet rotation around them. Inside, dozens of species went about their lives. Clith families prepared evening meals. Pelthans tucked their children into sleeping nests. Nasari drifted in their water tanks, bioluminescence flickering in patterns of contentment. And on the observation deck,